Hello, my name's Peter and I'm the Dungeon Doctor. Welcome to my channel where I discuss character building tips for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. If you enjoy listening to practical advice on how to build characters which are fun to play and make best use of the mechanics offered by the game, then please subscribe so you never miss an episode. This is session 0 of the Monk Masterclass series, where we will be presenting optimized builds for every single Monk subclass in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. In this video, we'll be giving an overview of the Monk class. We'll talk about some of the reasons why we might want to play a Monk, some of the problems inherent in the Monk class, and how we'd go about optimizing a Monk which is both fun to play and powerful at the table. Why do we want to play a Monk? The fantasy of a Monk is a martial class who, through self-improvement, can become masters of martial combat. In this way, they are very similar to the fighter class, who, on the one hand, get all their abilities from martial prowess. In the case of a monk, it comes from discipline and tapping into supernatural abilities. We see monks coming up often in popular media, everything from the martial arts movies of the 80s onward. We also see the inspiration of monks in modern day anime, such as Avatar: The Last Airbender and Dragon Ball Z. I love the monk class. It makes for a very cinematic character with a lot of mobility. It consistently makes lots of attacks, and it has features which potentially let them go toe-to-toe with opponents much stronger than them. However, while the class has a lot of fun, it often lacks in its overall effectiveness. It's well known within the optimization communities of Dungeons & Dragons that monks have problems as a class. They have a lot of great features. However, I believe that therein actually lies many of their problems. As a class, they can be too diverse. In a way, we can think of them as being spread too thin as a class. They have features that lend themselves to being a tank, such as deflect missiles and patient defense. However, particularly in early game, monks don't have a very high armor class, and they've got a very low hit dice with just a D8 compared to fighters who have a D10 and far below barbarians who have a D12 hit die. They also have features which seem to support them being damage dealers. They make lots of extra attacks thanks to extra attack and martial arts, as well as their flurry of blows. But their attacks individually aren't strong, and they lack support from the Feats system of Dungeons & Dragons 5e that would allow them to deal significant amounts of damage. They're also potentially great explorers. As a dexterity-focused class, they are very good with skills such as stealth and sleight of hand and acrobatics. They also could potentially pick up athletics from the monk class. However, unlike classes like the rogue or the bard, they do not gain any additional skills, and they also don't have any means in the class of gaining expertise. Monks can also potentially make great controllers. They, at 5th level, get the feature Stunning Strike. This allows them, when they hit a creature, to subject them to a Constitution saving throw against their key save DC, determined by their Wisdom modifier, that if the monster fails, they're stunned until the end of the monk's next turn. This feature is infamous for both being overpowered and underpowered at the same time. It is overpowered because it has a way of shutting down single enemies very well, but it's also considered underpowered because it's an expensive use of ki, each attempt taking up one additional ki point, and the monk begins with very few of these. In addition to this, most monsters in the monster manual have a very good Constitution modifier and sometimes Constitution saving throw. Therefore, Stunning Strike can be very unreliable as a use of a key point. As we can see, monks have many different roles that they can fill, and to fulfill these roles, they have to focus on 3 different ability score modifiers. They need to focus on their dexterity if they want to hit creatures. They need to focus on their wisdom if they want to have a good key saving throw and a good unarmored defense. They also need to focus on constitution if they have any hope of staying in melee within a fight for a long period of time. One common problem cited in the community is how little ki monks get. As they level up from level 2, they have a reserve of ki which is equal to their monk level. These ki points are restored on a short rest. The problem is that ki can run out very quickly. This is the case if a monk is using Flurry of Blows every turn. It's also the case when at level 5 they're able to attempt to use Stunning Strike on every one of their attacks that hit. Consequently, it's entirely possible for a monk to run out of ki within a single round of combat. I find that I tend to disagree with the optimization community on how restrictive ki is, and this is because it comes back on a short rest. Often in an adventuring day, characters are not under any kind of time limit with regards to their adventuring. This means that after a combat encounter, unless they have some pressing time constraint, there is no reason why they can't take a short rest before continuing with their day. This is not always the case. A traditional dungeon crawling adventure where players are in constant danger of being encountered by enemies is not a good environment for taking a short rest. However, I find that in modern day, more roleplay centric games of D&D, the opportunities to have a short rest are much more frequent. A single session of D&D may be split up between a combat section, an exploration section, and a roleplay section. When this happens, you can well see that after a combat, there may be an extended period of time where the party is doing relatively little, and so a short rest would be a natural thing to occur. That being said, your mileage with short rests will vary depending on what table you are at. So it really pays off to know the table you're already playing with and what a typical session will look like. People who are used to old school styles of Dungeons & Dragons may see this potential for having lots of short rests as a detriment to the game. These players may see resource management as an integral part of the game. Personally, I think this evolution of the game is a step in the right direction with the way that the meta currently is. Classes which rely on short rests, such as Warlocks, Fighters, and the Monk, are generally considered weak compared to many of the other classes available. And because of this, the meta moving towards short rests as being more frequent really lends itself to improving the balance of the game. So, having talked about the potential problems of Monk, let's actually talk about how we might optimize for a Monk. Let's begin with our race choices. Because monks are not generally relying on feats for their builds, we're less reliant on races such as custom lineage or variant human to build our monks. This is actually quite freeing, as it means we can consider a lot of unique racial features which support what we want to achieve with our builds. Additionally, the new races which are being presented in sourcebooks such as Wild Beyond the Witchlight or Monsters of the Multiverse all allow the options of customizable ability score bonuses, often allowing a character to have a +1 in 3 different ability scores. As we discussed earlier, monks as a class are mad. That is to say, multiple ability score dependent. They benefit from having a very high dexterity, wisdom, and constitution modifier. Because of this, these new races that are available in these sourcebooks are ideal for building a great monk. Additionally, in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, we have now got new rules where races are able to customize where they put their ability scores. This means that we aren't locked to any particular race in order to make an effective monk. When building an effective monk, I think that multiclassing is one of the most potent options that we have available. In all builds in this series, we will be assuming that players use point buy. This is both a popular means for determining ability scores, but it's also probably the only way that we can reliably compare different builds. When we're at a table using point buy, and we choose a race with a +1 in 3 different ability scores, this gives us the potential to maximize a monk's wisdom, dexterity, and constitution modifiers, both starting at 16. Meanwhile, their strength, charisma, and intelligence will all have a score of 8, which gives them a -1 modifier to skills, abilities, and saving throws involving those checks. This is okay for making a monk who may not rely on those stats. However, what if we want to multiclass into a class that requires a high strength, or high charisma, or a high intelligence? Multiclassing a monk with classes that rely on those abilities is perceived as very difficult because, as I said, they are mad. This is why you might not often see a monk multiclassed with a warlock, for example, or a monk bard, and especially a monk paladin. A monk paladin is probably what I'd call the holy grail of multiclassing, as that particular multiclass would require a minimum of 13 in charisma, wisdom, strength, and dexterity. I may at some point attempt a paladin monk just to see what is possible with this. Given how mad monks are, you might be wondering how we'd even generate the ability scores from point buy to even make these builds viable. I find that there's one important feat that we can get if we decide to go with human or custom lineage if we're really stretched for our ability points, and that's the tough feat. The tough feat is very simple. For each level that your character has, you gain an additional +2 hit points. This means that monks who have the tough feat are able to afford to have a much lower constitution score than they might otherwise have. Because of this, we're able to move the ability score points that we would have put into constitution into either our dexterity, wisdom, or perhaps a ability score that we require for multiclassing. Additionally, I think it's important to stress that not all monks need to max out both wisdom and dexterity. Wisdom is useful if we want to improve our unarmored defense or our key saving throw for features like Stunning Strike. However, in many monk multiclassing builds, we'll either have ways of boosting our armor class or other things that we can be doing instead of Stunning Strike. Dexterity likewise helps with our unarmored defense. However, if we're building, for example, a strength-based monk who is getting their armor class from something like armor, or we're making a monk which just doesn't rely on making attack rolls with its dexterity, then this again is an ability score that we can have as low as 13 to satisfy our requirements for multiclassing. Using these three tools, we have many ways that we can generate additional ability score points to multiclass into any class that we desire. With the exception of potentially the tough feat and some half feats, I don't believe the monk especially benefits greatly from taking feats. In the community, there are popular feats for monks such as Mobile, which grants them the potential to have a free disengage action whenever they attack an enemy, and Crusher, which allows them to push back an enemy when they hit them with bludgeoning damage. In addition to this, it grants the monk a +1 to strength or constitution, and if the monk hits the creature and gets a critical hit, it creates a stun-like condition on that creature. Until the start of the character's next turn, all attacks made against that creature are made with advantage. Mobile is great for monks who really want to double down on their mobility. Mobility is very important as it makes us much more flexible in our positioning on the battle map. However, unless we have something important to do with that mobility, I find that it's unhelpful. Crusher is useful for adding a +1 to strength or con, helping to round out an uneven ability score on the monk. It also effectively gives them 1 free disengage during their turn against creatures who only have a reach of 5 foot. This makes it an interesting alternative to Mobile. The 5-foot push can also be very useful for triggering effects when a creature moves into an area, such as moving into an area of Cloud of Daggers, or moving into the area of a web spell. The stun-like condition from getting a critical hit, however, it's very circumstantial and is probably not why we're taking the Crusher feat. Because monks rely so much on their ability score increases and don't gain that much benefit from feats, they are probably better off just taking a +2 to an ability score whenever they have access to it. I also believe that monks are probably better off getting features through multiclassing rather than through feats. When we can overcome the usual barriers monks have to multiclassing, we find that there's a lot of potential for letting them fulfill those different roles that they were designed to fill. Because of that, monks can be optimized for either tanking, control, or even damage dealing roles. In this series, we are going to optimize monks from every single subclass. A monk subclass is defined by their monastic tradition. At the time of this recording, there are 10 different monastic traditions available. These include the Way of the Open Hand, the Way of Shadow, the Way of Four Elements, the Way of the Sun Soul, the Way of the Long Death, the Way of the Kensai, the Way of the Drunken Master, the Way of the Astral Self, the Way of Mercy, and the Way of the Ascendant Dragon. At levels 3, 6, 11, and 17, monks gain unique features from their monastic tradition. Because we'll be making frequent use of multiclassing, the importance of features gained at later levels is greatly reduced. Because of this, the builds we make will generally focus on how we exploit the features gained at 3rd and 6th level. Additionally, in my builds, I will be focusing on the levels between 1 and 12. These are by far the most important levels in most campaigns. While there are groups that play at levels higher than 12, many of the written campaigns end at about level 12. Therefore, the vast majority of time players spend at the table will be with characters between those levels. Because of the content that's available, it's generally not optimal to optimize a character for 20th level play. That being said, I will end every one of my character build videos with recommendations for where the build could go after level 12. And also, it gives the community a chance to respond to the build ideas and how they would improve on them. This concludes my overview of the monk class for Dungeons & Dragons. Next session, I'll be taking on probably the most infamous, the underpowered subclass in D&D 5e, the Sun Soul Monk. But until then, thank you for watching. Again, if you want to stay up to date with the latest videos or just support this new channel, please consider subscribing and liking this video. Do you think this advice has some merit? Do you have any monk subclasses you want to see me discuss on my channel? Then please leave your comments below and I'll do my best to respond to these. But that's where we'll be ending this session. I've been the Dungeon Doctor, I hope you've enjoyed this video and I look forward to seeing you all next time.